They say the deadliest monsters of the Ice Age are long gone, buried beneath the permafrost, crushed under glaciers, erased by time. But what if one of them never left? What if it didn't die but simply waited, not in the forests or the frozen tundra, but deep beneath a translucent world of ancient ice, black, unmoving, alive in a silence so cold it could stop a heartbeat? Some believe the creature was only a legend told by dying explorers and broken tribes. Others whispered that the reports were real, that they saw the ice breathe, that they heard something tapping from below, as if something with too many legs was trying to find its way back to the surface. It was older than mammoths, older than wolves and spear-wielding hunters. This was a predator from before fire, before fear even had a name. And now, the ice is melting. If that sounds like fiction, ask yourself this. Why did an entire Soviet expedition in 1957 vanish while studying a Siberian glacier that locals refused to approach? Why did the last radio transmission end with a single line, "It's moving under us"? No one ever found their bodies. Just a field of cracked ice and drag marks leading into a fissure that descended far deeper than any drill could reach. Scientists blamed shifting ice plates. The locals called it something else, a word that roughly translates to the frozen watcher. If you're brave enough to follow this story into the dark, where science ends and something far older begins, make sure you're subscribed and leave a like so more people can descend with us. You won't want to be alone for what comes next. The wind roared like a living thing across the Siberian plateau, dragging needles of frost across exposed skin and turning every breath into glass. They told us the glacier was dying, cracking apart after thousands of silent winters. But standing there on that endless sheet of white, all I could feel was that something beneath it was waking up. The ice didn't sit still. It pulsed faintly under our boots, as though a colossal heart lay beating far below, slow and patient, waiting for the world above to grow warm and soft enough to return to. We were a team of 6. Scientists mostly. Geologists, glaciologists, and me, sent to document and photograph whatever we found. They laughed at the local legends when we first arrived in the village on the glacier's edge. Old women spat into the snow when we asked about the frozen expanse. Hunters warned us not to pitch our tents on the blue ice, the kind that looks like frozen ocean glass. They said that was where the earth was thinnest, where the sky could hear you but the ground could not, where things listened from below. The first night on the glacier, I couldn't sleep. The wind made low moaning sounds as it rushed over the tents, and somewhere far off I thought I heard a crack, a long, slow fracture traveling through ice like a whispering line. The others didn't hear it, or pretended not to. When I stepped outside, the world was a blinding drift of white and shadow. The moon hanging low and cold above jagged ridges, stillness. But my camera, left on a tripod facing the glacier's heart, kept glitching. The lens would fog, then clear, then fog again as though something warm had briefly passed in front of it. By morning, we found the first anomaly. A perfect circle in the ice, nearly 3 meters wide, melted just enough to expose a black void beneath. No heat source, no tools, just smooth edges and a hollow darkness that seemed to swallow sound. Dr. Levin lowered a laser thermometer into it, but the readings came back wrong, oscillating wildly between 40 and 118 degrees Celsius, as though the air below didn't obey the same laws as ours. He dismissed it as equipment malfunction, but the circle grew overnight. On the 3rd day, we found tracks. Not footprints, not the pads of a bear or the hooves of an elk. These prints were arranged in sets of 8, each indented claw-like mark no larger than a coin, but pressed so deep into the ice we had to chip them free to study them. The pattern spiraled outward from the blackened circle like a snowflake drawn by something that understood precision, something that moved in silence. That night the radio crackled awake long after we'd gone to our tents. A low static hiss, then a faint rhythmic tapping. 5 taps, pause, 5 taps again. Morse code for the letter S, repeated. over and over. No voice followed, just the steady pulse like a finger against glass, as if asking a question or warning us to answer. Dr. Volkov suggested it was ice shifting, but I watched his eyes in the glow of the radio light. He didn't believe his own words. Hours later, he was gone. His tent stood unzipped, his boots left behind as though he'd walked barefoot into the cold. We found his flashlight at the edge of the circle, still on, beam aimed downward into the same unending dark. No blood, no sign of struggle, only a single trail of those strange 8-pointed tracks leading toward the fissure, then stopping as if whatever made them had lifted itself up and vanished. By the 5th day, no one spoke above a whisper. The ice beneath camp groaned louder now, warping, expanding like frozen lungs inhaling after ages of sleep. I pressed my ear against the ground once just to prove to myself it was only imagination. What I heard wasn't wind. It was a soft scraping, like something brushing against a boundary, patiently searching for a weakness. That evening, the sun bled red along the horizon, staining the glacier the color of dried rust. Snow drifted in slow spirals, and for a moment, the ice shimmered as though something moved just under its surface. A shape. Long, angular, hundreds of tiny spindled limbs tracing the underside of the ice like fingers against frosted glass. And then it was gone. No one slept. No one dared. The temperature dropped so low our breaths froze in the air before touching our scarves. The radio hissed again, not tapping this time. Breathing. Wet, uneven, like lungs filled with water. And then a voice. Faint, almost childlike, crackled through the static. It's still here. We stared at each other, frozen more by fear than cold, because the voice wasn't Volkov's. It wasn't any of ours. It came from somewhere far below us, and the ice answered. No one dared touch the radio after that voice faded. It sat in the corner of the tent like a trapped animal, still crackling with faint static, as though something on the other end was still listening. The air smelled of metal and fear. Outside, the sky had turned a gray so pale it almost looked like bone, and the wind no longer howled. It whispered, soft, careful, as if not to wake whatever stirred below. Dr. Levin insisted we pack our instruments and begin the return trek at first light. But deep down, we knew the glacier was no longer letting us leave. The ice felt different underfoot with each passing hour, thinner, softer, as if aging in fast motion. It creaked like brittle paper beneath our boots. By midday, the fissures had multiplied. Thin white lines, stretching across the ice like veins on old skin, reaching toward our camp. I stepped carefully, every crunch under my feet echoing louder than it should in the open expanse. The melted circle we'd found days before was gone, swallowed into a larger cavity that yawned like the mouth of the earth. It wasn't just a hole anymore. It was a tunnel, perfectly rounded, symmetrical, as though carved by something with intent. The walls of it were smooth, too smooth, as if hundreds of legs had brushed against it for centuries, polishing the ice into a glassy sheen. Levin's hands shook as he set up the thermal scanner. The screen flickered with blues and purples, the colors of lifeless cold, until a thin vein of yellow appeared, winding deep beneath us like a river of warmth. Something alive generating heat, moving slowly upward. It must be geothermal activity, he muttered, even as the line shifted, as if it were circling us beneath the ice, watching, counting. As the sun dipped, shadows crawled across the glacier, long and skeletal. We stayed close to the lanterns because the darkness felt different here. It carried weight, depth, like water. I found myself staring at the ice beneath the light, certain I saw thin cracks spreading in slow motion, branching like black spider webs. And then I realized they weren't cracks. They were tunnels, dozens of them, fine and branching like veins, leading all toward the same place, us. Petrov was the first to break. He grabbed his pack, muttering curses under his breath, stumbling through the snow toward the ridge. His flashlight beam jittered wildly. We shouted after him, but he didn't stop. The ice groaned beneath his weight like something exhaling. Then it gave way. A sharp crack, a scream cut short. His light vanished. The snow settled as though nothing had happened. Only silence remained, and then the tapping returned. From beneath our feet this time. Softer, closer. We tied our tents together that night, huddled in the smallest ring of light we could make. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper, every shifting of snow like footsteps. I couldn't stop staring at the shapes beneath the ice, blurry and distorted like shadows moving underwater. Once, I saw something scrape the surface from below, thin, pale limbs, jointed too many times, dragging faint lines like frost etchings. When I blinked, they were gone. Dr. Levin barely spoke. He sat with the satellite phone in his lap, staring at it like it might bite him. Finally, just before dawn, he dialed base camp. Static. Then a voice, distant and unstable, like it was traveling through miles of ice. "Leave," it whispered. "The ice remembers." And then a sound like 1,000 tiny legs skittering over glass. So sharp and so close, we dropped the phone entirely. Morning brought no light. Only a pale, dying glow through thick clouds. The ice around us had collapsed further. The tunnels widened, dark mouths opening like wounds. Something was rising. The glacier groaned and shifted, not like a block of frozen water, but like a living thing stretching after a long sleep. Testing the strength of its cage, Levin approached the edge of the largest fissure with a flare in his hand. He struck it. The red light hissed to life, casting violent shadows across the ice. The flare illuminated the tunnel's interior for a brief second. What I saw still claws at my sanity. The tunnel walls weren't just smooth. They were lined with faint hexagonal patterns, like the exoskeleton of some enormous creature pressed against the ice. And deeper still, something moved, slow, deliberate, jointed segments shifting like an ancient engine made of flesh and bone. Levin stumbled back, eyes wide, lips trembling. "It's not from now," he whispered. "It's from before." The flare slipped from his hand and vanished into the darkness below, falling for far too long before the light finally disappeared. Snow began to fall then. Soft, soundless, but it wasn't comforting. It felt like ash, like the sky was mourning us before we were gone, and beneath the silence, the ice breathed. By the time the third night came, sleep was no longer a luxury any of us could afford. Not because we weren't tired, but because no one dared close their eyes. The glacier had begun to speak in noises too deliberate to be nature. Long groans that rose from beneath like whale song turned monstrous, punctuated by sharp cracking sounds that echoed through the cold air like splintering bone. Each sound drew closer, circling us beneath our feet, as though something was testing the boundaries between its world and ours. The boundary was growing thin. We burned the last of our flares to keep the darkness at bay, their crimson light staining the ice in red veins. Without them, the night felt like a mouth waiting to close. Levin paced near the ruined edge of the fissure, muttering calculations under his breath, trying to anchor himself to science. The others sat silently, eyes wide and unblinking, each of us listening to the distant scraping beneath the ice, the slow movement of segmented limbs against frozen walls. That sound became a heartbeat, a countdown. When morning finally bled through the clouds, pale and weak, we found something new waiting for us at the edge of camp. Not tracks, not tunnels, a body, or what was left of one, frozen upright in the ice like a sculpture, its face contorted in a silent scream. The skin had gone glassy and white, fused to the ice around it like it had been pulled downward while still alive. But it wasn't Petrov. This corpse was older, much older. The clothes were remnants of Soviet military fabric, faded beyond recognition, and around its neck, encased within the ice, hung a rusted dog tag. The name was almost unreadable, but the year was clear. 57, the same year the last expedition vanished. Suddenly the legends didn't feel like stories anymore. They felt like warnings. I pressed my hand against the ice beside the body, but snatched it back instantly. The surface was warm, not melting, radiating, as though the glacier was feeding on something deep within itself. We gathered what little equipment we had left and made the decision we should have made days earlier. We would leave, even if the storm swallowed us. It was better than being devoured by a glacier that breathed. But every direction we turned, new fissures had opened, like a web spun overnight. The glacier was fracturing from within. As we argued over the safest path, Elena, the quietest among us, pointed toward the horizon. At first I didn't understand what she saw. Then my blood ran cold. The ice ridge in the distance, the one we'd been using as a navigation marker, was gone. In its place was a jagged valley, as if something beneath had pushed upward, cracking the glacier like a shell. And along the exposed surface, etched into the blue-white ice, were carvings. Not human, each line curved in spirals and concentric circles like symbols burned into bone. They reminded me of spider webs, or warning signs. Levin wanted to document them, to take photos before we left. I wanted to run. But before we could do either, the radio hissed to life again. This time it wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was Petrov. His tone was flat, distant, like someone speaking from underwater. "It doesn't kill you all at once," he said. "It keeps you. It listens. It waits." Then something wet and heavy dragged across the microphone, followed by a sound I will never forget. A low, chittering breath. Not human, not animal. Something older. We ran. The wind flayed our faces as we staggered through the storm, packs bouncing against our backs. The snow swallowed our footprints as fast as we made them, as if the land itself was erasing us. Behind us, the ice groaned louder, like a scream trapped beneath miles of frozen earth. I glanced back only once, just in time to see the ground where our camp had stood collapse inward, swallowed whole. No tents, no radios, just a widening hole in the world. We reached the edge of the glacier at dusk, exhausted and half frozen. The safety of rock and soil lay just meters ahead. Levin was the first to step off the ice. He turned to help Elena. Then the glacier exhaled, a deep, icy breath, and the ground beneath them cracked like thunder. The ice opened. A pale limb shot out, thin, jointed, impossibly long, and wrapped around Levin's ankle. He didn't even scream as he was dragged backward, his nails carving red crescents in the snow. Elena lunged for him, but the ice split beneath her feet, forcing us to pull her away as Levin disappeared into the fissure. His voice echoed once, then nothing but silence. We stood there, trembling, staring at the widening chasm. Snow fell gently, indifferent, and far below the ice pulsed like a heartbeat. We should have kept running. We should have never looked back. But once we reached solid ground, something in us shifted. The glacier was no longer just behind us. It was watching. A living, breathing expanse of ancient ice, scarred with symbols, hiding something that should never have survived this long. The storm faded into an eerie quiet. No wind, no wildlife, just the slow settling of snow and our shaking breaths. We set camp far from the ice's edge, beside the black stones of a glacial moraine. But even the ground there felt wrong, as if the cold had seeped too deep, tainting the earth itself. Elena sat by the fire, clutching the rusted dog tag we'd taken from the corpse in the ice. She traced the faded numbers with numb fingers, whispering the name again and again, as though speaking it kept her tethered to reality. Volkov, 1957, the same team that vanished without a trace. Except now we knew they hadn't disappeared. They'd been taken, kept, buried in ice but not forgotten. I dragged a log onto the fire, watching sparks drift upward like dying stars. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The wind at the edge of the glacier made a sound like distant clicking. Not natural, rhythmic. As if something ancient was tapping its limbs against the ice, searching for a way out. Night fell like a curtain. The fire burned low. Dr. Elena finally looked up from the dog tag and said what we were all thinking. "It isn't a legend. It isn't a spirit. It's something real, something that predates us." She pulled a worn notebook from her coat, her field journal. It was filled not with geological sketches or ice core diagrams, but pages of old Arctic folklore. The Evenki, the Yakut, the Nenets, all spoke of something beneath the ice, a creature not born of fur or fang, but of chitin and silence. They called it Tungir, meaning the one that waits. Others called it the Frozen Watcher. One legend told of tribes who built their camps on the glacier when the world was colder, long before iron or gunfire. They vanished overnight, their sleds and tools left untouched, as though pulled through the ice by unseen hands. Hunters told stories of hearing clicking beneath their tents at night, of seeing shapes move beneath frozen rivers, pale, multi-limbed, patient, not hunting for food but for warmth, for life. We listened, trying to dismiss it as folklore carved from fear and endless winter. But the ground beneath us still felt like a drumskin, tense, resonating with something moving below. I pulled my coat tighter as the firelight flickered. "If it's real," I whispered, "then how has it survived this long?" Elena's eyes reflected the flames. "Ice is not death. It's preservation. The world buried it to keep living things safe. Now the ice is melting and it remembers hunger." Silence fell again, heavy, absolute. Then, movement. Far out on the glacier, a ridge of snow shifted, slowly, deliberately, not from wind, from something beneath it, pressing upward. For a heartbeat, I saw a pale form beneath the translucent ice. Too many limbs, slow and graceful, like a spider drifting in frozen water. Then it sank back down, as if aware it had been seen. We should have run again. Instead, we stayed, because fear, when it grows too large, becomes a cage, and because part of us needed answers, needed to understand what had claimed our friends. We moved at dawn, staying on rock and soil, circling the glacier's edge until we found a frozen cave entrance, a yawning crack where the ice met the mountain. A faint warmth drifted from within, carrying a smell like wet stone and something older, metallic, almost like blood. Inside the cave, the walls glistened with frost. Our lights cut through darkness that felt thick like something alive. Further in, the ice changed, no longer natural, but shaped. The walls bore the same hexagonal patterns we'd seen in the tunnel, only deeper, etched as though with countless scraping limbs over centuries. And there were bones, not scattered but arranged, woven into the ice itself, reindeer, wolves, humans, their skeletons suspended like insects caught in amber, spines arched in final terror. Near the back of the cave, we found an ancient altar of stone, half buried in frost. Carved into it were spirals, identical to those on the distant ridge. A warning, perhaps, or a shrine. The air changed then, warmer, moister, beneath our boots. The ice throbbed gently, like breath against glass. And from somewhere deep in the glacier, we heard it again, the tapping, not distant this time, close, all around us, as though the ice itself was answering. The deeper we went, the more the cave felt less like a passage and more like a throat. The air was warmer, damp, carrying the scent of minerals and something faintly organic, like old blood thawed after a long winter. Frost clung to the cave walls in thin, glass-like sheets, and beneath them, veins of ice pulsed softly, as if they carried something other than water, memory. The tapping we'd heard before was no longer a distant question. Here it was a heartbeat, soft, patient, everywhere. It echoed through the stone, through our bones, through the air between our breaths. We walked in silence. Words no longer felt useful. Only fear guided us now, raw, primal, ancient. The lantern light flickered against the ice, revealing glimpses of things half embedded in it. Bones, not clean skeletons, but twisted remains curled in agony. Bodies that had been dragged into the ice. Frozen mid-scream, their fingers reaching outward as if clawing toward the last breath of air. Some were dressed in furs and leather, others in tattered Soviet uniforms like the corpse we'd seen near camp. All of them held the same expression in their hollow eyes. They had looked into the dark and seen it looking back. The ground sloped downward. The ice beneath our feet was no longer smooth but grooved, thousands of faint parallel lines, as though something vast had passed through here again and again, dragging its limbs in long strokes. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a chamber so wide the lantern light dissolved into black before touching the walls. And at its center, the glacier was no longer ice. It was alive. A massive shape lay beneath the translucent surface, suspended in a cocoon of frost like a creature dreaming beneath glass. Not entirely spider, not entirely anything that belonged to this era. Its body was long, segmented like an armored centipede, yet each segment bore 8 pale limbs folded inward like a sleeping arachnid. The limbs were too thin, too long, each joint bending at angles that made the stomach twist. Its head was hidden, buried deep in the ice, but from its thorax extended long, root-like tendrils that entwined through the glacier like veins. The ice did not trap it, the ice fed it. Elena stepped closer, her breath fogging against the surface of the frozen cocoon. "It's not dead," she whispered. "It's waiting." The creature's limbs twitched slightly as though stirred by her voice. Not much, just enough to remind us it could hear, could feel, could choose. The tapping began again, but now it wasn't from the ice. It was inside our skulls, a faint, rhythmic pulse, like a language spoken without sound. One tap, then two, then silence, a pattern, a summons. My vision blurred. For a moment, I felt the glacier breathing through me, cold rushing into my lungs, my heartbeat slowing to match the pulse beneath the ice. Warmth spread across the surface of the cocoon. A thin crack etched slowly across it, tracing the outline of one long pale limb. Levin had been right. It wasn't from now. It was from before, older than the mammoth, older than the first humans who dared walk upon ice. A predator that did not stalk through forests or oceans, but slept through ages, feeding only when the world thawed just enough to feel the warmth of life again. The cracking grew louder. Elena reached for me, but the ground gave way beneath her as the ice split open. I grabbed her arm, but the frost was melting around our boots, water rising from below like breath. The cocoon shifted. A pale limb emerged, slick, jointed, glistening with ancient frost. It didn't lash out. It touched the ground softly, testing, claiming. We ran, not toward the cave entrance, but toward the only sound that didn't belong to the glacier. Wind, real wind. Cold and clean. We scrambled up the frozen slope, slipping on wet ice, lungs burning, hearts pounding faster than the tapping behind us. The ice roared, a sound like mountains cracking, like the earth waking. We burst into the open air just as the cave behind us collapsed inward. A plume of snow and ice shot into the sky like the breath of some colossal beast, scattering crystals that glittered like broken stars. The glacier trembled beneath our feet, shifting, expanding, as though something immense was rising beneath it, pushing upward. We didn't stop running until the glacier was a distant, silent line on the horizon. Even then, the tapping stayed in our skulls, faint, steady. Not a warning, not a threat, a promise, because the world is warming. The ice is melting, and somewhere beneath that ancient sheet of frost, the creature is no longer dreaming. It is listening, waiting, and it is almost free. But what we saw beneath the ice, it isn't the only thing evolution has kept hidden. Far to the south, in the tangled forests where the trees grow taller than cathedrals and the air hangs thick with mist, locals whisper of another hunter. Not buried in ice, but hanging in silence, between branches, silk glistening like silver in the moonlight. A spider so large it no longer hunts insects, but birds. And if the frozen watcher taught us anything, it's that nature remembers how to build monsters. Next, the giant spider that eats birds. Evolution gone too far,